The cost of living in Vermont is getting out of hand. If you live in Vermont or you're thinking about moving to Vermont, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The cost of housing is high. Taxes have gone up. Property taxes in 2024 increased by an average of almost 14% across the state. At the same time, the state is talking about budget cuts. They're talking about cuts to healthcare and education because even though our tax rates are going up, our tax revenues are not covering our expenses. So Vermont has a problem. And the truth is, if we don't make a change, we're going to continue trending in the opposite direction. We're going to see increased taxes. We're going to see housing and the cost of living continue to increase across the state. But luckily, there are people working on this problem. Specifically, the Vermont Futures Project is what we're going to talk about in this video. What I'm holding right here is their economic action plan, where they highlight 3 specific steps that we can do as a state to help reverse the course that we're on and send us into a prosperous future. But the thing is, these are drastic changes. These are changes that we have to make right now to our housing policies, to our business policies, and we have to attract more people to the state. In this video, we're going to dive directly into what the Vermont Futures Project recommends for the state and how we can be prosperous moving into the future. But before we do that, let's talk about this chart because I think it helps us visualize where we're at as a state versus where we want to go. So we can see here, we're currently in the high cost of living section of this chart. We have ample services and we have low density. So if we continue to stay in this area, we're going to see housing costs continue to increase. We're going to see our taxes continue to increase, and we're going to see our cost of living as Vermont resident continue to increase year over year. If we don't want to live in this environment, we don't want to live in a place that is expensive, a place where it's difficult for the average Vermont resident who grew up here to stay in Vermont, then we need to make some sort of change. What they're recommending is we get down to the bottom here, the low cost of living pathway. We increase our density. We don't have to cut our services as much, and we get the low cost of living. So the solution here is to bring more people, specifically working age people, into the state to get us to this desired outcome that I think most Vermonters would agree, unless you're extremely rich, you don't care about the cost of living, you can afford to pay higher taxes in order to keep Vermont less dense while having their services. If you're not in that ultra rich category, I think you would agree that we want a future where Vermont has enough services to take care of its residents, but at the same time, we don't tax our residents into poverty. The other options that we have here is if we want a low cost of living and low density, then we can cut services. We can reduce our spend on healthcare. We can let our roadways and bridges and public infrastructure across the state start to deteriorate. That will get us to a lower cost of living where we still have low density, but things aren't that expensive. I think this chart is very useful. I'd recommend going to the Vermont Futures Project website and checking out what they have. They have great resources there. And real quick, I learned about the Vermont Futures Project through my job as a realtor with Jerry Riley Real Estate. If you're looking to buy or sell a home here in Vermont, all my contact information is in the description. Reach out to me directly and I would be happy to help you. Okay, now back to the video. Let's talk about exactly where we are as a state so we can understand what's going on, why we're seeing the state get more expensive while our budget is being cut. And the truth is, it all starts with our population. That's the reason why things are more expensive here in Vermont. For example, the population in 2023 grew by just over 300 people statewide, which is not very much. We need more people moving into the state in order to contribute to that tax base. Now, at the same time, the percentage of working class people in the state is starting to shrink. The percentage of people who are over 65 has increased drastically over the past 10 years. In 2010, about 15% of Vermont's population was 65 and older. In 2020, that population sits at about 20%. And if we don't make any changes, that 65 and older population will grow to around 27% statewide. Now, why is this a problem? It's not that we don't like the 65 plus population. We love the 65 plus population here in Vermont. But the issue is that people who are 65 and older, they're not contributing to the tax base as much as those who are in their working years, those who are aged between 18 and 65. These are people who are in the prime of their working years, who are working most likely 40 plus hours a week, and they're able to contribute to the tax base. People who are 65 and older, they're often retired and they're not adding to the tax base as much as the working age population. So what's going on is we have a larger percentage of older people in the state, and that is what's causing this imbalance. It's not that there's too many people who are 65 and older in the state, it's that the ratio between the working age people and the people who are 65 and older is getting out of balance. So how do we solve this issue? Well, we solve this issue by bringing more working age people to the state. What's the first thing we need to do in order to attract more people to the state? Well, we need places for them to live. If they don't have housing, if they can't rent an apartment at a reasonable price, if they can't buy a home at a reasonable price, they're going to choose to move to a different state. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to build more housing. So how are we going to do that? The Vermont Futures Project recommends that we have at least 350,000 homes in the state by 2035. Currently, there are about 270,000 non-seasonal homes in the state, so we need about 80,000 more homes over the next 10 years or so. We need to increase the housing stock by around 2% per year. That averages out to around 5,300 homes for the first few years, and then increases to around 6,000 homes per year for the next 10 years. And that's significantly more than the housing stock that we're currently bringing to the state. As you can see here, from 2020 to 2023, we only built around 7,000 homes across the state during that 3-year period. So we need to triple the amount of new construction and units coming online here in Vermont. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, they recommend a few simple changes that we can make to the building process and to encourage people to build more homes on their current lots. With the building process specifically, what they recommend is working on streamlining the permitting process. Permitting costs are a significant amount of the total purchase price. If you look at the National Association of Home Builders, they estimate that it adds around $150,000, if not more, to the end purchase price of a property. So if we're able to make the permitting process more efficient here in Vermont, it'll cost builders less to bring these homes to the market, and then they can charge less to the end buyer when they go to sell their property. How can we make the permitting process more efficient? Well, what the Vermont Futures Project recommends is that we have clear guidelines, and if builders abide by those guidelines, they get streamlined through the process. They get quicker approvals for their builds. If they're allowed to build a single-family home on a certain lot, as long as their design meets the requirements, they can quickly go through the permitting process and get approved faster than what we have right now. They have a story in here in this packet where it took 93 days just to get permits approved for a new construction project here in Vermont. 93 days, not for build permits, not for zoning permits, just approval to actually build this project. So if we can cut down on that time frame, utilize the technology that we have, utilize AI and the internet, streamline the process of getting these documents in and approved by the town, that will cut down on costs for builders across the state, which will help bring more housing to the market, and ideally with lower housing costs, both rental costs and new construction costs throughout the state. Now, there's two things that the state is currently doing to help bring more housing to Vermont. One of them is called the VHIP program, or the Vermont Housing Improvement Program. It helps homeowners use underutilized space like a detached garage or a lot that can house another unit. They fund these homeowners. They give them $50,000 per unit that they bring to the market and help them bring a new rental unit to the state of Vermont, which is great. Now, the caveat here is that this rental unit has to be rented at or below market rate for a period of 5 to 10 years, depending on if you go with the forgivable loan or you go with the grant that the state has. So not only is this bringing more housing to the state, but it guarantees housing at least for the next 5 to 10 years at an affordable rate. So I personally think this is a great program. It solves the issue by adding more housing to the state. Now, another thing that the state is doing, which I don't think is as beneficial as the VHIP program, is they've increased property transfer tax on secondary homes. So if you buy a primary residence here in Vermont, you pay around 1.47% of the purchase price of that property in property transfer tax. So you can think of this like a sales tax on a home. When you buy a home, you have to pay 1.47% sales tax if it's going to be your primary residence. Now, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. There's a discount for the first $200,000 of the sales price. Speak with me, speak with your attorney if you'd like further clarification on that. However, as of last year, as of 2024, Vermont increased the property sales tax on secondary homes across the state. So instead of 1.47%, it's 3.62% for secondary homes. Why do I feel this isn't a great solution? Because if you think about where most of the secondary home purchases are in the state, it's in ski towns. It's in towns like Stowe or Killington or around Okemo, up in Jay Peak. These towns are seasonal towns. These aren't towns where there's a lot of economic opportunity and there's not a huge demand for primary home purchases around these ski areas. If you look at Chittenden County, where I am, around Burlington, or you look around Rutland, Montpelier, there aren't that many seasonal property purchases in these areas. Most people who are buying homes, they're either buying it as an investment property and renting it out on a long-term basis, or they're purchasing this as their primary residence to live in the area. Now, it's not everybody, but the vast majority of home purchases in the year-round towns, in the hubs around Vermont, are for year-round primary residence or investments. The secondary home purchases primarily are in ski towns. So if we increase the property tax, which is what the state has decided to do, we're discouraging investment into these vacation towns. So I get what they're trying to do. They want to discourage people from buying homes, from taking homes away from people who would purchase these properties as their primary residence. But in reality, I don't think it's actually serving that purpose. But regardless, that is a step that the state has made in order to increase the non-seasonal housing stock here in Vermont. So we are taking steps, we're making headway to bring more units to the state of Vermont, to bring more housing units to the state, which is great. So if we're going to meet our housing goals, we will also need to upgrade our infrastructure. We'll need to upgrade our water treatment facilities, our wastewater treatment facilities. We'll need to upgrade our roadways. We'll need to make sure that we upgrade our schools, upgrade our education and our healthcare to make sure that we have enough services for the average Vermonter to, again, maintain the level and the lifestyle that we enjoy living. So how are we going to pay for these upgraded services? We can use something called tax increment financing. And what this is we take a loan out against the future housing and the future revenue that these towns and counties will collect from property taxes in the future after this housing stock is built, and use that money upfront to help upgrade our infrastructure. Now, Burlington and South Burlington have already started to do this. South Burlington used it to upgrade their Market Street town center, where they're trying to make that more of a downtown area for the city of South Burlington. I think it's beautiful over there. They've done a great job with construction, and construction is almost complete in that area. Now, Burlington has used this to upgrade their wastewater facilities, their water facilities, as well as the construction projects that you may see if you're downtown on Church Street. So I think this is a great way that we can improve our towns to hold the additional residents that will be living here if we increase our housing stock. If we have enough housing, we have upgraded infrastructure, now it's time to get more people to the state. How do we do that? Where are these people going to work? What jobs are they going to have? What the Vermont Futures Project recommends is they recommend upgrading our business climate, make it a premier work from home space, invite businesses here, lower business tax rates. How could lowering business tax rates add to the overall tax revenue that the state has? Obviously, the property taxes that people will pay and the income tax that people will pay will contribute to the overall tax revenue that we bring in as a state. But decreasing the overall business tax could actually increase the revenue that we receive from that business tax. So just as an example, say a company pays $10,000 in business taxes, and there are two other companies out there that don't want to do business in Vermont because they are turned off by the business tax environment. If we lower the state business tax, instead of paying $10,000 a year for one company, we lower it and that company pays $5,000 a year. So We decrease the tax by 50%. Say that brings in 2 additional businesses. Well, now the total tax revenue off of this one industry collected is $15,000, an increase of about 50% compared to just having that one business here. And we provided more jobs and attracted more people to the state. So obviously this is a hypothetical example. It's much more nuanced than that, but it's not a foreign concept. If you've read any of Thomas Sowell, he talks a lot about this, how an increase in property taxes can actually lead to a decrease in tax revenue. That's a potential way that we could increase our overall tax revenue and increase our business activity here in Vermont, create more jobs for Vermonters, is by decreasing our business taxes across the state. Now, if we have jobs here, what are we going to do to get people here? The number one thing that we can do is keep our college graduates here in Vermont. If we have jobs for them to stay here in Vermont, we will see a large uptick of UVM students, of Champlain students, of Middlebury students staying in the state as opposed to moving to cities like Denver or New York or Boston, because there's higher paying jobs. There's more economic opportunity for them to take advantage of. Now, something that I heard a lot when I had a lot of friends who were going to UVM is here in Vermont, you're paying Boston prices for things like rent and housing, but you don't have the Boston income. So if we increase our business activity, I think that would go a long way with keeping Vermont college graduates here in state. Vermont currently has the worst retention rate for its college graduates out of any state in the country. Most of our graduates leave and go to other states after they graduate college. These are people who love Vermont. They understand the state. They've been downtown. They've gone to the local bars. They've been to Sputies and Red Square. They like living here. We should do what we can to keep them here. Now, they have some other strategies here that I'm not going to dive too deep into, like eliminating the tax on military benefits for veterans, advertising Vermont as a premier work for home destination. Now, I think these are great strategies. I think it could go a long way, but I think if we have the housing and we have the business activity, people will come to the state. So look, I love Vermont. I love living in Vermont. I want to see Vermont thrive moving into the future. And I have a daughter on the way. I want to see my daughter grow up in a healthy, happy state and have the economic opportunity that she deserves when she's older. And we can't get there on the current path that we're on. We have to make some sort of change. We have to do something to make Vermont more affordable, so it's not just a state where only the rich can afford to live in. The way that we do that is through more housing, more economic growth, and increasing our working age population to help us achieve the life that we desire. And if you made it to the end of this video, I'm sure you're somebody who loves Vermont as well. Now, you may be somebody who doesn't want more density here in the state, or maybe is okay with more density, but just not in your backyard. But the question that you have to ask yourself is, what does the future of Vermont look like if we don't make that change? How expensive are things going to get? How high are taxes going to get? What cuts are we going to have to make as a state if we don't make these changes, if we don't bring more housing, if we don't bring more people into the state? And we're not talking about making Vermont New York City, but we are talking about increasing the growth of Vermont, increasing our population at a sustainable rate where we can all continue to live the lifestyle that we enjoy living here in Vermont. So talk about these points with your friends and family. Feel free to leave a comment. I'm happy to have discussions with you folks in the comment section. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something out of it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.